ready to dive into some Spanish contract law.
Let's do it.
We've got this really interesting document from MCHM Abogados. It's a firm over in Almeria, Spain.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
And they seem to be big on making the law, easy to understand for everybody.
Right. Accessible.
Exactly. Accessible. Which I think is great because legalese can be a headache. So I'm kind of curious to see how they approach this whole contractual responsibility thing.
Yeah, me too.
They basically say it boils down to keeping your promises, right?
Yeah, like honoring what you agreed to in a contract.
Which sounds simple enough on the surface, but
it can get complicated.
It can get complicated, I bet. Especially when someone doesn't, hold up their end of the bargain.
Absolutely. And MCHM Abogados, they actually break down those contract breaches into 3 main types.
Oh, okay. So what are the 3 types?
So you've got your total breach, partial breach, and then delay.
Okay, well, I'm guessing total breach is pretty self-explanatory. Someone just completely bails on the whole deal, right?
Yeah, it's like imagine a construction company that just abandons a project halfway through.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a total breach. You're left with an unfinished building and probably a pretty huge financial loss.
Ouch. That's a nightmare scenario.
It is.
All right, so then what about partial breach? What does that look like?
So that's like you get something, but it's not quite what you were promised.
So like if I ordered a paella pan online and it arrived all dented.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Or let's say a supplier sends you half the goods you ordered. So they fulfilled part of the contract, but not all of it.
I see. So it's a breach, but there's still some room for, working things out maybe.
Right. You might be able to negotiate or find some kind of solution.
Okay, makes sense. And then the last one, delay. That's got to be the simplest one, right? Just missing a deadline.
Yeah, on the surface it seems simple, but imagine like a shipment of oranges from Valencia arriving a week late during their peak season.
Yeah.
The oranges are still good, but that delay could really hurt the buyer financially.
Right, throws everything off.
It does.
Okay, so we've got these different types of breaches, but what happens when one actually occurs? Do people just immediately run to their lawyers and start suing each other?
Well, not always. I mean, sometimes it can get to that point.
Yeah.
But MCHM Abogados, they actually outline 3 main legal consequences, and these are designed to kind of make things right for the person who was harmed.
All right, so what are those consequences?
So they are damages, rescission, and forced execution.
Okay, let's break those down one by one.
Sounds good.
Starting with damages. What does that actually mean in this context?
Basically, it's about compensation, like making up for the losses that the harmed party suffered. So think about that late shipment of oranges again. Let's say that delay caused a restaurant to lose out on a whole week of profit from their signature paella dish.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so in that case, damages could be awarded to cover those lost profits.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about the cost of the oranges themselves.
Right, exactly. It's about the bigger impact of that breach.
It's like the ripple effect.
Yeah, and damages can even cover something called lost potential profits.
Lost potential profits. Okay. What's that?
So let's say that same delayed shipment caused the restaurant to miss out on a big catering contract.
Oh, yeah.
Because they didn't have enough oranges.
Right.
So those potential earnings from the catering contract could actually be factored into the damages as well.
Wow. I never even thought about that. Okay, so we've got damages, which is about compensation.
Yeah.
What about rescission?
Okay, so rescission is a little different. It's basically like hitting the undo button on the whole contract.
Really?
Yeah, so remember that construction project we talked about?
Yeah, the one where they just left.
Right, so if the client chose rescission, the contract would be completely canceled, the construction company would have to pack up and leave, and any payments would be returned.
So it's almost as if the contract never existed.
Exactly, it just unwinds the whole agreement.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay, so we've got damages, we've got rescission. What about the last one, forced execution? This one sounds a little more...
a little more intense.
Yeah, a little intense.
It can be.
So what does it involve?
This is where the Spanish court system actually steps in and forces the breaching party to do what they originally promised.
Oh, wow. Okay, so give me an example of that.
Okay, let's say an artist was hired to paint this big mural for a new hotel in Barcelona.
Okay.
But then the artist gets another offer and decides to just ignore the hotel contract completely.
Oh, no.
So in that case, the court could use forced execution to legally obligate the artist to finish the mural, just like they originally agreed.
So it's like you're not getting out of this that easily.
Right. It's a way to make sure people actually follow through on their commitments.
Even if they're trying to, wiggle out of it.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So forced execution is definitely a powerful tool. But here's where I'm curious.
Yeah.
Even when there's a clear breach of contract, does that automatically mean you're going to win a lawsuit?
That's a good question. And actually, MCHM Abogados, they really emphasize this point. They say winning a lawsuit isn't guaranteed even if there's a breach.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you actually have to meet certain conditions to win.
Oh, okay. So what are those conditions?
Because, this is where it gets really important for people to understand how Spanish contract law actually works.
Right. Because it's one thing to know the theory, but it's another thing to know how it plays out in real life.
Exactly. So first of all, you have to prove that there was a real legally binding contract in the first place.
Okay, so it can't just be like a casual agreement or a handshake deal.
Right. It has to meet all the legal requirements under Spanish law.
I see. All right, so what's the second condition?
Second, you have to prove that the other party actually broke the contract.
Okay, so you can't just be unhappy with the outcome.
Exactly. You have to show that they specifically failed to do what they promised in the contract. And you need clear evidence for this.
That makes sense.
And then the third condition, you have to prove that you suffered a real measurable loss because of their breach.
Okay, so this is where those damages come in. Right?
Exactly.
You need to be able to show, like, a financial impact.
Right. Not just, inconvenience or that you're upset about it.
So if someone was, like, a day late delivering something, but you didn't really need it right away.
Yeah, you might not have a strong case for damages there.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's the fourth condition?
The fourth condition is that you have to prove that the loss you suffered was directly caused by the breach of contract.
Okay, no coincidences.
Right.
Like it has to be a direct result of their actions.
Exactly. So let's say a farmer agrees to supply tomatoes to a canning factory. But then a huge hailstorm wipes out the whole crop.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So in that case, the farmer can argue that they couldn't fulfill the contract because of something totally out of their control.
Right, like an act of God, basically.
Exactly. It wasn't negligence or them intentionally breaking the contract.
Okay, so there's a lot to think about here. It seems like understanding these conditions could really help people avoid getting into legal trouble in the first place.
Absolutely. It's all about being informed and knowing what your rights and responsibilities are when you enter into any kind of agreement. And that's something that MCHM Abogados seems to really prioritize.
Yeah, they really seem to want people to understand this stuff.
They do.
Well, this has already been so insightful, and we're just getting started. So when we come back, we're going to explore how all of this fits into the bigger picture of Spanish contract law. And of course, we'll talk about what it all means for you.
Stay tuned. We're back, and, I've been thinking about this whole contract law thing. I kind of always assumed it was all about, huge corporations and, super complicated legal battles.
It's easy to think that, for sure, but like we've seen, it really does affect everyone.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah, from that cup of coffee you buy to those big business deals, it's all contracts. Right, and MCHM Abogados, they really make that point. They're like, hey, this is important for everyone, not just lawyers.
Totally.
It makes you wonder about all those, little terms and conditions boxes we click online.
Oh, yeah.
We probably agree to a million contracts without even realizing it.
Totally. Yeah, I guess you could say that.
But that's why this emphasis on clear communication is so important, right?
Exactly. And that's what MCHM Abogados is all about. It's not about tricking people with legal jargon.
Yeah.
It's about making sure things are clear and everyone knows what they're getting into.
It's like building trust, almost.
That's a really good way to put it, actually.
So it's less about, fighting and more about setting things up right from the beginning.
Exactly. They want everyone to understand the rules of the game, so to speak.
Makes sense. So in your experience, what are some of the things people get wrong about Spanish contract law?
Well, a common one is thinking that a verbal agreement is just as good as a written contract.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, sometimes verbal agreements can be enforced, but honestly, it's always better to have things written down.
So even if you, really trust the person you're making the agreement with.
Oh, yeah. It just protects everyone involved, and there's no question about who agreed to what.
It's like a safety net.
Exactly. And another misunderstanding is that you always need a lawyer for every single contract.
Really?
Now, obviously, legal advice is always a good idea, especially for complicated stuff.
Yeah.
But for simpler agreements, there are resources out there to help you figure things out on your own.
Great. And MCHM Abogados actually does a great job with that, like on their website.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
They got tons of articles and FAQs, even a glossary of legal terms.
It's awesome. And, it really shows how dedicated they are to making legal information easy to access.
Right. It's not like some secret code.
Exactly.
And speaking of accessibility, they even have those extended office hours and an emergency hotline. You don't see that very often with law firms.
Nope.
No.
It makes you feel like they really care about their clients. Like they're there for you no matter what.
Totally. It's like they understand that legal problems don't just happen during business hours.
Exactly.
Okay, so getting back to the bigger picture here.
Mm-hmm.
MCHM Abogados really stresses that contract law isn't just about, like, winning lawsuits or avoiding getting sued.
Right.
It's about creating a culture of, like, responsibility and being upfront with each other.
It is, yeah. It's about thinking about the implications of what you're agreeing to.
And not just for yourself, right? But for everyone involved.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool, actually.
It is. Like, imagine if everyone approached agreements that way.
Yeah.
Thinking about fairness and being transparent.
It would change a lot of things, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah. Because when everyone's on the same page from the start, there's way less room for, misunderstandings and arguments down the line.
Right, like everyone knows the expectations.
Exactly. And that leads to stronger, more successful relationships, whether it's in business or even just between friends.
So it's about having integrity and a sense of fairness.
Absolutely. And MCHM Abogados, they're basically advocating for a more ethical way of doing things, where knowing the law isn't just about protecting yourself, it's also about making sure everyone's treated fairly.
I like that. It's a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
Wow, this is really making me rethink how I approach agreements in general.
That's great to hear.
It's not just about the legal stuff. It's about building better relationships.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But there's still one more thought-provoking point from MCHM Abogados that we need to discuss.
Oh, right.
So stay tuned, because when we come back, we'll wrap things up with that final piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so we're back, ready to finish our deep dive into Spanish contract law.
Let's do it.
You mentioned that MCHM Abogados left us with a really thought-provoking idea, something about being proactive. Oh, right, yeah. So they talk about this idea of proactive awareness when it comes to contracts.
Proactive awareness. Okay. I love the sound of that. But what does it actually mean?
Well, they're basically saying we should shift from, only thinking about contract law when something goes wrong, being reactive,
Right.
to thinking about it up front, like making it part of how we approach agreements in general.
I see. So instead of scrambling to figure things out when there's already a problem, we should be thinking about these principles from the very beginning.
Exactly. Like anticipating potential issues, being super clear in your communication, and setting realistic expectations right from the start.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It could probably prevent a ton of headaches down the road.
Totally. And it's not just for business deals either.
Oh, you mean like personal agreements too?
Yeah, like with friends or family. Imagine if everyone had that mindset.
Yeah.
Thinking about fairness, being transparent, considering the long-term implications.
It would definitely change things for the better.
Yeah, it would.
So it's about more than just knowing the rules. It's about using that knowledge to build better relationships.
Absolutely.
This whole conversation has been really eye-opening,
Yeah, it's been great.
Contract law isn't just about boring legal terms. It's about, approaching agreements ethically and responsibly.
Exactly.
And MCHM Abogados, they're not just lawyers, they're educators.
Yeah, I like that.
They want people to feel empowered, not intimidated by the law.
It's a really refreshing approach. It makes you wonder why more firms don't do that.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive today, what are the key takeaways we should leave with?
Well, I'd say the most important one is that contractual responsibility is everyone's responsibility.
Right. It's not just for lawyers and businesses.
Exactly. No matter what kind of agreement you're making, whether it's a lease, a business deal, even just an agreement with a friend, understanding the basics of contract law is crucial.
It's about protecting yourself, and it's about making sure everyone is treated fairly. And remember, there are resources out there to help. If you're ever in doubt about something, don't hesitate to reach out to an expert.
Good advice.
And of course, a big thank you to MCHM Abogados for their fantastic document.
Yes, thank you.
You can find their contact information on their website. mchmabogados.es. And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Spanish contract law. We'll be back next week with a brand new topic, so stay tuned.